As you know, we've covered the struggle over curriculum and rules and regulations in our public schools for quite some time now. But we often discuss this from the perspective of the parents or from the students or maybe even from the taxpayer who wants to take control of how the unions, along with their friends in the government, are running the schools that we're paying for and that we're compelled to put our children into. But we don't often discuss this from the teacher's perspective. You know, not all teachers are monolithic. Not all teachers are represented by the teachers' unions. Well, joining us right now is one of those teachers who actually pushed back on these policies. Peter Vlaming, he's a former French teacher in Northern Virginia, and his attorney, he had to lawyer up, Caleb Dalton from Alliance Defending Freedom. He's a senior counsel there. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Well, let's talk with you first. You were a French teacher, going about your business, teaching young kids how to speak French, which is a noble cause. And then you were, you were confronted with the new gender ideology and how it was forced onto the protocols that you had to follow as a teacher. What happened here?
So to sum it up, to cut to the chase, my school administration fired me for not personally endorsing the new gender ideology and promoting it with my speech.
This manifests with one of your students who was now identifying as the opposite sex from which they were born, right?
Correct, yep. Female student, great student, enjoyed having the student in class, and announced that she was going to adopt a male identity and had a new male name, first name, that I used in good conscience. I addressed her using that new name, and we had a good rapport. And at the same time, I wasn't going out of my way to use feminine pronouns, right, or masculine pronouns. I wasn't using feminine pronouns in her presence so as to provoke her. I didn't pronounce like what I thought about her transition.
You didn't go out of your way and say, hey, she, her, her. No. You just avoided pronouns altogether.
I used her new name. And in the classroom, it's pretty straightforward because I say, hi, Larry, how are you doing? I don't say, hi, Larry, how is he doing?
Right.
And if I'm talking about you, if you're present and I'm talking about you, referring to you, it's more polite to use your name anyway.
Sure.
So I was using the new name that the student had chosen, and I explained that to the administration.
This sounds like a reasonable accommodation. This is like, listen, you're asking me to use pronouns that it's just not truthful in your mind. It sounds like, you know.
Right. I explained to the administration, the principal, assistant principal. I said, okay, here's how so and so is transitioning. Here's how I'm handling it.
Yeah.
I'm using student's new name, and they said, no. We need to hear you use masculine pronouns, even when there are no students present. So even if it's just staff, or you're talking to another staff person, if you don't use masculine pronouns, or even if, and this was an ultimatum given to me by the superintendent, if I was not, the ultimatum stated that that using the name was not enough, and that if they thought that I was substituting the new name for a male pronoun, when I could use a male pronoun, that would be grounds for my termination, which is, by definition, the thought police.
Yeah, literally, and speech police, all wrapped up into one.
Yep, exactly.
And so now, and you got fired. You got fired because you didn't adhere to that ultimatum.
I told them, I like the student. We have a good rapport.
Yeah.
I'm not adopting the student's new ideology.
Right.
What you're telling me to do is to adopt via my speech and to promote via my speech something that I don't believe.
This brings up your counselor, your attorney. Instead of Caleb, jump on in here because it sounds to me like you've got a pretty good case. In fact, even with a paper trail. Instead of facing a classroom teaching them French earlier today, you were instead facing the Virginia State Supreme Court. Tell me how your argument was to the judges today.
Yeah, so we had the opportunity to represent Peter at the Virginia Supreme Court today, affirming the rights of all Virginians to speak freely and not to have their religious rights trampled on either. What's fundamentally at stake here is that public schools shouldn't be able to compel teachers to personally endorse an ideological belief. There wasn't an issue. Peter was an excellent French teacher. He was just granted continuing contract status right before this happened. Highest marks. He was the best teacher. It wasn't because of something he said. It was because of something he couldn't say. They wanted him to personally endorse this belief system using his words. And that's not something anybody should support.
Yeah, and I keep coming back to the fact that what is the truth here? What's a fact? I mean, you were fired because you refused to lie. Really, fundamentally, words do matter. As a French teacher, gender is a very specific thing, isn't it?
Sure it is. Sure it is. I mean, how we, referring to someone using third-person pronouns, it's explicit. You're saying what you believe about the very nature of that person,
right,
as if they're a man or a woman.
And again, and not to be offensive or anything, in fact, I think it sounds to me like a pretty fair compromise here, an accommodation, counselor, to actually say, listen, you want to be called, Jim instead of Jane? Fine, I'll go ahead and do that. I'm just not going to go this extra mile. Isn't that kind of the reasonable accommodation that legally is supposed to be made?
It absolutely is. And Peter went out of his way to accommodate this student. He used a preferred name, something he didn't tell you. He actually had his whole class choose new French names. They use French names in class, right? So that the student wouldn't feel singled out as choosing a new name.
Wow.
So he went out of his way to grant as much toleration as much as he could for the student. And yet the school instead imposed their totalitarian view, which is you have to say these words or you'll be fired.
Now, this is all within the framework of next week's midterm elections. And as you know, issues like this, parents wanting to take back control of their schools, this kind of legislation pushing its way into the classroom and into other parts of our society has become a major issue politically here. So let's talk about how important elections are. This occurred during the last administration in Virginia, right? How many years ago was this?
This is 4 years ago.
All right, so that's Ralph Northam and Attorney General Herring. This was a very different Virginia than it is today. Did the state of Virginia take a side in this argument today in the Supreme Court?
Yeah, so we're thankful the Virginia Attorney General has filed an amicus brief in Peter's support. Not only that, the Solicitor General of Virginia will be arguing in his favor at the court today. So
in other words, all of these state elections that are occurring next Tuesday for Attorney General and Governor and such, pretty important when it comes to issues like this.
There is no doubt that elections have consequences.
Yeah. So, and as usual, whenever you argue in front of the state Supreme Court, I mean, I know you're here to defend your client, and I want you to be made right, sir. But this is actually going to affect a whole broad spectrum of citizens of this Commonwealth of Virginia.
Absolutely. And we're hopeful that the Virginia Supreme Court protects everyone's rights. This isn't just about Peter. It's just not just about pronouns. This is about the ability of every American to be able to speak freely in their public workplace without being told you have to endorse this belief or you're going to be fired. That's not America. That's not the Commonwealth of Virginia, and it's not one that I want to raise my children in.
Let me follow up here when you say public employee, because the fact that this is a state-run school and that it's the government, that raises the stakes here with the First Amendment. The government shall not, right? But what about for private businesses? Does this have any effect there?
Well, obviously any court ruling could, but the First Amendment and the federal sense and the Virginia Constitution applies to government actions. So the public school is a government actor, and when you're talking about a government actor, the Virginia Constitution specifically says you can't burden somebody in their civil capacity as a government employee because of their religious belief. That's exactly what they did to Peter. They said, if you hold this belief that you can't lie, you're not fit to be a public servant, and that's wrong, and it violates the Constitution.
Yeah, I have to wrap this up, but real fast, Peter, you've, through this ordeal, you've actually not only left Virginia, left teaching, you've left the country. You live in France now. If you're victorious here, will you come back to America? Will you have renewed hope in what's going on here?
It's been 4 years, and so in that time, yes, you're waiting for justice, but you also have to move on.
Yeah.
Having been fired from my position there really did close the door to public education. I was in the middle of doing a master's at William & Mary in school administration, which I finished. So I had plans. I was investing in education in Virginia, but I had to look at other options.
Well.
And so
Understood.
Yeah.
But I appreciate both of you fighting this fight. We look forward to seeing the outcome. More to come on O'Connor Tonight.